I'm Matthew Kurbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a special episode of Law Subscribed live on LinkedIn. Thrilled to have with me today Max Payne. Or Max Payne. That's a video game, everybody.
It's a great video game. I love that introduction.
That is. I've had. Can you tell I've had back-to-back meetings? We're doing it live. Mike Payne, not to be confused with the video game character Max Payne. Mike Payne, still doing some really cool stuff with Boss Advisors. Mike, welcome to the show, and tell my listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Matthew. Well, I'm a CPA and a lawyer. I started my firm in 2017. Previously, I was at a Big Four accounting firm, doing nonprofit work primarily. Prior to that, I worked for a regional law firm and then a smaller CPA firm while I was going through law school. And so when I decided I wasn't going to pursue partnership at Big Four, I met with every JD CPA that I knew, and I asked them, how can I practice both? How can I wear both hats? And every single one of them, I probably talked to 4 different practitioners. They all said, don't do it. Don't try to be both. Just choose one track, and that's what you are. If you're going to be an accountant, your legal skills and experience will help you. If you're going to be a lawyer, the technical understanding and knowledge you have with tax returns will help you. But they all recommended I don't do it, so of course I went forward and did it anyway. And so at the time, I met with the State Bar of Arizona and the Arizona Board of Accountancy, kind of walked through what I thought would be the ethical rules that would need to be adhered to. They green-lighted it, basically said there's no restrictions from running a business outside of a law firm and doing them side by side. I had certain restrictions in terms of keeping things separate, separate calendars, separate emails, separate books and records, separate bank accounts. Of course, all the trust accounting had to be adhered to. And so my vision at first, and this has kind of come to fruition, was to build the accounting firm to scale it, right? Because, every Big Four accounting firm is a pyramid, and it's easily scaled by inserting staff and seniors and managers. On the law firm, I kind of kept it for convenience. I kept it more of a practice than a business. And so that's how I ran for the first 3 years. And then in 2020, Arizona announced kind of quietly this alternative business structure idea. And we got wind of it, and we were actually the first ones to apply and be approved. That was in first quarter of 2021. And so we became an alternative business structure. We were in the very first meeting with the ABS committee. And, I was very thorough with my application. I read all the rules, probably spent 50 hours preparing that application. And actually the representative that presented us to the committee thanked me for my thoroughness in preparing that application and said, we probably need to make some adjustments based on the responses you made. So if anybody's having a hard time filling out application out, I apologize. I may have made it worse for you.
Well, benefit of being an early mover in that regard, and also you're in good company being a guest on Law Subscribed, because we are all those who reject the status quo, right? So when they told you can't do it, don't be lawyer and be CPA at the same time, you said no. You said I'm going to figure out how to do it, and you were doing that then before ABS even became an option. But was that part of the reason why it was obvious for you to continue, as you had already been doing this? And now what were then the benefits of moving from, doing it separately the way you were to just adopting alternative business structure, and maybe you don't have to be as separate as it was previously?
Yeah, so the biggest benefit was I was underwater with the administrative burden of running 2 firms, because you have double everything. And so the biggest benefit for me personally was being able to take my admins from my accounting firm, now have them service everything. We can now use the same technology and software for engaging clients. We can use the same technology for doing our books and one tax return. All of that stuff became much easier. And then the other benefit was I had a business partner at the time who was not a CPA, but he was an enrolled agent with the IRS, so kind of a tax-focused accountant. And he was able to, we essentially merged the accounting firm into the law firm. And then that's this entity that became an ABS. And so he was able to become a partner in the law firm, whereas previously, under the rules in most states, how it continues to stand, a non-lawyer cannot own an interest in a law firm. And so we were able to just bring everything under one roof, frankly, the practice areas that we're in, we're not doing anything in front of tribunals. And so we don't do any litigation. And so, we don't really need to be, an ABS other than the fact that I have a CPA partner now, a different partner. I have a CPA partner now. It's really the only reason we need to be an ABS. Otherwise, we could operate as a law firm and do everything we do now as a traditional law firm. So the ABS has kind of become a promotional tool for us. And, it's fun to say we're the first ones that were approved. And now we see these big players coming in, KPMG, Deloitte, Aprio, all starting law firms in Arizona. We knew that would happen eventually. And there's quite a lag. Those are big ships that are hard to move. But, that's going to be, now that the ice has been broken, there's going to be a lot to follow.
Right. That's really something to see that, a small firm like yours paved the way for the big four to come in to Arizona and try to do the alternative business structure. And it just shows the power that the solo small firm practitioners can have in any market doing anything, whether that's ABS like you did, or even ditching the billable hour and leveraging subscriptions, which brings me to one of the main reasons I want to have you on the pod, Mike, and that is I heard you talk about how actually it was like a footnote in your interview at Maximum Lawyer that you offer mostly subscriptions. And so I'm curious to know, and so are my listeners, how did you get started leveraging the subscription model, and then how exactly are you using it?
Yeah, so we do everything on a flat fee or a subscription basis. We don't do any hourly billing. Almost, with very few exceptions, when there's a project that doesn't have a defined scope and we don't know how long it's going to take. Even then, we'll try to provide a range and fall within that range. And so we actually started subscription services before we used the term subscription. It kind of it started with our tax practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we would do is we found that clients didn't like a big surprise tax bill or tax prep bill at the end of the year. And so we initially just took our tax prep fees, spread them out over 12 months, and then added a margin for consulting that happened during the year. That eventually turned in over the course of a few years, turned into a more formal tax subscription. And so we now have 5 practice areas. Each of them has a subscription. We just implemented the legal subscription about probably less than 2 years ago. And that was the trickiest one to roll out because we're not general counsel. We're not going to do litigation. We're not going to do employee discrimination matters, a lot of things. And my brother's a town attorney for a city here in Arizona. And so he's true general counsel. We don't have the scope or the expertise or the interest in doing that much work. So we kind of consider ourselves business legal counsel. And so all on the transactional side. And, do you want me to get into what we're doing, what's covered there?
Yeah. Just a couple of things that I want to point out first, and that is what you did and what I frankly asked my CPA firm to do, and I encourage other CPA firms. It's a no-brainer what you did, but you actually did it, right? You're taking reoccurring revenue, right, an annual payment once a year, and you're turning it into recurring revenue, subscription payments that's monthly or annual that you could count on. But instead of it just being one service, what you also did, I'm curious to know why you did this, right, is you did what's called plussing in the subscription economy, right? You didn't just give the same thing and divide it by 12, right? You increased a margin because you anticipated consulting, right? And then now you've updated and changed the subscription so that you have like better defined subscriber benefits. That's not just like, oh, we do your tax prep at the end of the year, right? So like, was that just a thing you intuited? Did you read anything, listen to anything? Like, where did you figure out how to do that?
So that actually came from my experience working in larger firms. I hated billing, 6-minute increments. I hated it for myself and I hated it for the clients. For example, we had a hospital that we were doing the tax work for, and this is probably a $50,000 to $75,000 tax return. And when I was the client representative, so they would call me for quick questions and I would answer the questions, and then under the firm's policy, I had to bill for all my time. And so I would bill 15 minutes, and then a $275 bill would go out to the client. And so one time I just sat down with a partner and it's like, hey, look, we're their tax advisors. We are their tax guy, right? I don't think it makes sense for us to send them a bill for a question that's within the scope of what we're doing. It's directly related to the tax return. It's not out of scope. And so he agreed, and it ended up, the client was happy to not have these little nickels and dimes. And so that's kind of where I thought of, hey, is there a way to bill clients in a way that builds in some margin for them to ask questions as they come up during the year, instead of having to start the clock every time something happens, because I think it negatively affects your relationship with your clients. They tend to, previously they Googled it, and now they're going to use ChatGPT to try to come up with their own contract or research their own question. Whereas we tell them, whether we're on the tax or legal side, hey, we are your tax advisors, we are legal advisors. Don't try to do this yourself. Lean on us. The more contacts we have with you, the better we know your business and the better we can serve you. And you're not going to pay anything extra. It's already built into your fee. And so we kind of flipped the script on, with tax specifically, the tax compliance or tax prep being the value add, to that being a ancillary piece of the service, and the advice being the primary value add.
Yeah, and I'm looking at your website now, and so especially for folks who are joining live, you can right now, or if you're listening to this later, hopefully you're not driving or running or something. You go to it, in the company is Boss Advisors is the firm, so it's bossadv.com as an advisor. And under services, the very first tab is subscription and flat fee pricing. And boom, there you go. Like, you've got your subscriber benefits defined. You've got pricing listed on your website. I think, we are in like a small club of firms that actually show what our pricing is on our website. And something you do that I actually haven't seen before, Mike, and I mean, I've looked at over, 50 law firm websites that show, what their subscriber benefits are or which package to go into. Now, they don't all list their pricing like we do, but you have typical numbers. And I really like that, right? Typical number of owners, typical number of employees, typical revenue. And so that, like, to me, because I've trouble with this, of how I explain my subscriber benefits and which package is right for each potential client. Like, is you don't want to say, well, yeah, you could still subscribe at this level, even if like you don't fit the criteria, right? And I end up, because of that, I like half of my subscribers, like probably like 20 something subscribers, have custom packages because of that, because it's like you didn't really fit into one package, because I kind of made it seem like you needed to, have a certain level to be there. So I'm curious to know, like, is that working for you on like the typical thing, and how does that help guide the closing conversations and the service that you're providing?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something, when my first business partner left about 2.5 years ago, I took about 3 months, went to my cave, and just rethunk all of our pricing from the ground up. And what we were doing before was the typical three-tier structure, where you would give the clients the option to choose, base service, or, additional service, or premium service. I didn't like that, because it put the client in the position to have to choose and have to use their judgment to figure out what legal or tax services they needed. That's squarely on us, in my opinion. And so I had never seen this done before. I still don't know if other firms are doing it, and I don't care. What I like to do is I basically looked at all of our clients, figured out, I thought there might be 3 or 4 categories that clients fall into, and that is the case. We've got 4 tiers of clients. We can basically describe them as an investor, typically a real estate investor. They're a startup. They're an owner-operator, which is like a single-person S-corp usually, and then an enterprise owner, where they have multiple operating companies. And so instead of them choosing which service package they want, we categorize them into one of those categories or profiles, and then we tell them, based on our extensive experience, this is what you need. You need 2 meetings a year, 3, 4 meetings a year. You need routine on-call advice on a regular basis, which is available for all of our packages. So they can call extra meetings, emails, texts, phone calls as often as they want to. And then we have different services that align with each of those different packages. Obviously, there's a pricing difference between them, but we have, what you're seeing is the tip of the iceberg. I have my pricing tool open right now, and we have this fully defined. And the reason I did it this way is because I had become the bottleneck. I was doing a lot of custom pricing, and it was a lot of kind of gut feeling pricing. And I became the bottleneck in my team issuing engagement letters, because I had to review every single one, and that was a control issue that I couldn't let go of. And so finally I decided, I'm going to put this all into a tool, And then all I have to do is tell my admin, here's the client name, here's the services they're signing up for, use the standard pricing. And then she'll go and draft an engagement letter. She can send it out without my review because I already know the terms of the engagement letter. I know that the pricing is going to be standard. So it also means we don't discount fees, which I learned that lesson the hard way. It's a bad look to do that. And so that's kind of our approach, has just been, let's take that away from the clients to decide what they need. Let's use our professional judgment. And there are times where there's projects that fall outside the scope of the subscription, and they're aware that those will be flat fee projects that are billed separately. And we explain it to them when we engage with them. We explain it to them and get their agreement again before we do the extra work. They sign a separate engagement letter or addendum to the engagement letter, and then we go from there.
Yeah, and that's where I get a lot of the pushback is, well, what happens if a client needs work outside of the subscription? Well, your engagement agreement has to account for that and the procedure for what happens when it's outside the scope. And you have to have pricing prepared for that. Now, for me, I've gone as basic as I can. And for me, that's $50 a page, right? Which they could pay for separately without subscribing at a high level. Because, my pricing is a little different. Like, you've got 4 client avatars on here on this website just for the subscription packages, right? All of my, not all, I should say. The majority of my clients fall into that owner-operator category for you. I don't represent investors, startups, or enterprise-level clients. I do represent individuals, but I've just got those 2. And I used to do freelancers, but I don't really target freelancers anymore. I have some legacy freelancer clients, but they're not in the mindset of outsourcing on an ongoing basis. And so I just found it wasn't a good fit, right?
Yeah.
But I default then to, okay, we have another legal project outside of your project limit for the month, $50 a page, right? And so curious to know how you are doing that fixed fee pricing if it falls outside. And also kudos that you're committing to not billing those by the hour. But then do you have to go through an analysis of like, okay, let's see what type of project this is. And then you're able to quote them, a fixed fee for that.
Yeah. So the way I did it was very much using my analytical skills that I learned doing accounting. Essentially, what I started with was a spreadsheet, and I listed out, and this is kind of dual purpose. One was to determine the fair pricing. The other one was to actually write down the actual process so that it could be replicated, and then figure out the exact roles that go into it. So spreadsheet, I started with the name of the task, right? So it might be drafting an operating agreement. And so in order to draft an operating agreement, we have a legal admin who will send an information request, and that might take 30 minutes. And then we have a paralegal who will review the responses and draft the initial operating agreement. Then we'll have a lawyer, and that's 3 hours. And then we'll have a lawyer come in and spend an hour and a half reviewing and amending whatever changes need to be made, and then we will send a draft to the client. And so maybe, I've got now what the cost rate is for each of those positions. Maybe it's $35 an hour for the admin, $60 an hour for the paralegal, and $150 for the lawyer, just for example. And so now I know what my cost is to prepare that agreement based on the hours it takes. And then I take that and I completely throw it out the window and I say, what's the market fee for an operating agreement? And so I did a lot of research to figure out if people are doing flat fees on operating agreements, what are they charging? And so I make sure that, our prices based on the cost and the step I skipped was I'll take our cost and then I'll multiply it by our target gross profit margin, which is 50%, 50 to 60%. And then that gives me what I have to make on that in order for that to be profitable. Then I compare that to the market rate. And if the market rate is lower than what it costs me to do the work without, considering my profit margin as well, I'm not going to do that work. And so there's a lot of things that we turn down because they just don't make sense for us to do. Payroll, for example, we outsource that. It doesn't make sense for us to do that. And so, that's kind of how I came to that conclusion. If the market rate for that is higher than our cost and profit goal, then it's something that we're going to do, and we're going to do it in a way that is efficient and as automated as possible. We use Wealth Counsel to draft documents, for example, which is a very efficient tool. And, I think I lost my other point, so I'll let you go on.
That's okay, because I have comments, because that's great, right? And something that Maybe it's because you're also a CPA, right? That you like you think about the numbers and you think about things because lawyers have a hard time with the numbers, with the math, with the business side of all that, right? But you're not afraid of that. But I think you're looking at it in a way that I don't normally hear. And again, it's because you got that that finance and accounting background, and that is some lawyers when they look at their quote unquote costs, they're looking at, well, if it's going to take me like my billable rate to the client, $300, $500 an hour, that's my cost. And they're like, no, that's not your cost, right? Like that's your billable rate. Like your cost is, what does it cost to do the work? Well, you're paying people to do it. Like that's a cost, right? Like that's an actual cost. And I think that's the appropriate way to think about it, right? I get asked, what's my cost? I don't employ anybody. I'm a true solo leveraging AI and automations, right? So my cost is my operating expenses and what I want to pay myself and the taxes that I owe on that, right? Like that's it. Right.
Yep.
So that's the way to think about it. So I think you think about cost in the right way. And I also love how you throw it out the window. So, but for the lawyers, I just want to point that out who are listening, that are thinking about, well, how do I figure out what my costs are? Right. Like you get, that's how you got to think about your costs, right? Not think about what's your billable rate applied to how long that thing's going to take. That's not the way to think about it. You mentioned wealth counsel and how that's saving a lot of time, because when you do look at those costs, if you could lower those costs, but you keep your rate the same, you've increased your margins, right? And so that's the incentive to use technology like Wealth Counsel and other tech tools. So I'd love to ask the guests on the pod, tech tools that you're using. So you mentioned Wealth Counsel. Any other tech that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so we're using Westlaw for research, like, as you'd expect. It's funny, Matthew, we kind of mentioned this in our pre-gaming, but we are very unique. We're the first firm to formally practice law and accounting under the same roof. And so when we make decisions around our tech, we basically have to choose a packaged legal product or a packaged accounting product. There's nothing that is designed to serve both firms. And so we end up having to choose one and then retrofit it to, apply to the other area. And so our CRM right now is the Clio Grow. So we do our intake forms, so where we track leads and things like that, which then we have to, of course, retrofit for accounting specific language. And then most of our other tools, and then Wealth Counsel, of course, most of our other tools are accounting tools. So we use a tool called Carbon, Karbon. Carbon is a workflow management tool. So it's basically a dashboard where I can see all of the work in the firm by person, by due date, by lots of different factors, by client. I can see where it is in the process. I can see how much time's been billed to it. I can see, where we are in our budget to actual. And then we use a tool that it's with Carbon. It's called Ignition, and it's specific to accounting firms, but I've heard they're going to roll out to other professional service providers. Ignition is probably the best tool that we use in terms of provides the most value for us. The reason it provides the most value is it's the tool that, to break it down, it sends engagement letters and bills the client. But the way it does it is unique in that the client has to review the engagement letter and put in their pricing, put in their payment information and agree to pay us before they can sign the engagement letter. We can't do work, of course, without a signed engagement letter, according to ethics in our insurance policy. And so by the time we get a signed engagement letter, we've already either billed them or they've agreed to us billing them at a later date after certain tasks have been accomplished. And then we can initiate that billing without the client's consent. We do notify them that, hey, there's a billing coming out because phase one has been complete, but we don't have to go back and chase AR and accounts receivable. We really have very low accounts receivable for a firm of our size because we basically collect upfront, or we always collect something upfront, and there's some gray area there that we try to navigate very carefully as to what's been earned on receipt versus what needs to go in the trust account. But, for the most part, we will collect something up front, either as a true retainer or as, for the initial work that's being performed.
Let me tell you about the brand new sponsor for Law Subscribed, Paxton. I've been using Paxton as my legal AI tool for over 2 years. I continue to evaluate and demo other legal AI tools in the market and still decide to stick with Paxton because of its reliability, its accuracy, its ease of use, affordability, and they do not lock you into a long-term contract. Now, as a transactional and fractional general counsel attorney, I'm using Paxton for all of my substantive and non-substantive legal work, whether that's legal research, analysis, drafting, or enhancing existing legal work product. In the time it used to take me to draft and analyze legal documents, documents. Now, after a little bit of back and forth with Paxton, I have something ready to go in minutes that used to take hours or even days. While I'm no longer a litigator, I could see how valuable Paxton would be when researching a new issue, preparing for a deposition, drafting a motion, or going to trial. So if your firm would benefit from using Paxton as your legal AI tool, then make sure to use the link in the description when signing up to let Paxton know I sent you. That's all about our new sponsor. Now back to the show. Yeah, and the lawyers, we all sort of understand like earned versus unearned fees and where it needs to sit and all that. But how does that apply then if somebody's like paying the firm for like primarily accounting related services? Is that almost always earned upon receipt?
Yeah, we don't have any of the same rules. So this is something I've confirmed, is that the legal rules only apply to legal work. And so we don't use trust accounts for accounting services paid in advance. Of course, there's still ethical rules that say if you haven't done the work and it hasn't been earned, you have to refund that to the client if they request it. And you know, we the most part, the position we've taken is if there is a rule that is more restrictive because it's, on the legal side, for example, we'll apply that to the whole firm with a few exceptions.
Right. And look, longtime listeners of the podcast know, and in the podcast version of this live chat, it will say this in the intro, but everything today is for educational purposes only, no ethics advice provided. Okay, just in case this is somebody's first episode.
You don't want to take ethics advice from me. I don't, that's not my practice area. So not that I'm unethical, but there's much better attorneys for those kind of things.
Right. We're pushing boundaries, right? I like to say in my ethics CLE, that's also only for educational purposes, that you got to consult ethics counsel, but also be ready for them to not have all the answers because you're pushing boundaries, right? We're operating in a little bit of a gray area. But even having said that, like a lot of jurisdictions, if you haven't read the rules on fees and the comments, they update them. With sometimes, like in 2023, Illinois updated their rules on fees, our Rule 1.5, and we could take any fixed fee and deposit it right into an operating account. It just doesn't necessarily make it earned upon receipt, and you have to refund any unearned fees, right? So like how you define your subscriber benefits and when things are earned, if it's earned in stages, that becomes really important, but you just got to disclose it to your client, and the engagement agreement is the perfect place to do that.
Absolutely.
So I'm not surprised to hear that you're only using a couple of legal tech tools because at the end of the day, legal tech tends to be, a little bit more on the expensive side. It tends to try to do everything and not just some narrow things really well. So hearing that, like that carbon tool and ignition, I mean, look, I'm going to check that out when we're done here today. I think that's interesting to check out. Any other like final like tech things, and maybe you have people on your team who are more in charge of tech than you are, but like any other interesting tools you want to mention?
No, I've continued to lead out. It's something I enjoy, something I try to stay in front of is the tech. So that's typically me. Maybe not the best use of my time, but we've done well with it. We have an outsourced IT firm that, does some of the back end stuff that I don't want to do, but in terms of watching what's happening. So our core principles regarding tech is it has to be cloud-based and it has to integrate with each other. And if it doesn't meet one of those, we're not going to adopt it. And so I was lucky enough to start my firm at the beginning of 2018 when cloud-based accounting was an option, when cloud-based, Office and things like that were options. Whereas if I had started, 20 years ago, that might not have been the case. And then I would have had to go through what a lot of the listeners I'm sure have gone through, which is moving from paper to paperless and moving from a server to cloud-based. But we were able to start day one and just say, even our tax software is very rare. There's only one tax software at the time. It's an Intuit product that was completely cloud-based. I knew I wanted to hire remote employees from day one because that was a benefit I enjoyed working at Ernst & Young, was that they gave us tremendous flexibility in where we could work. And so I knew I didn't want my team to have to come into the office to prepare tax returns. I also didn't want to pay for a server and have the risk of having all of my files on a physical server. And so the first accounting firm I worked for would take a physical tape at the end of every day, put it into the server, and then they would take that home and put it into a vault. And that was their data security. And so, I'm happy to pay Google or Intuit or Microsoft to store my data securely. So that's what we did from day one. And it's worked well. We are I'd say a hybrid firm. My business partner and I share an office here. We sublease the rest of the space, and the rest of my team is remote, which I love because I now have the option to hire out of state and out of country. And I've got an employee in Mexico, one in Argentina, California, Pennsylvania, kind of across the United States.
So then how do you handle things from like a multi-jurisdictional practice perspective, in particular being an ABS, and it's still kind of an unknown about how it's going to be treated in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, currently all of our lawyers are licensed in Arizona. We have one that's also licensed in Illinois. But the position that we've taken with regard to certain things is that transactional law can be practiced across state lines. And this is going to be state specific, obviously, and it's going to be task specific. But for the most of the work we do, at least, as long as we can competently represent the client, we can do things like drafting contracts, forming entities, purchase agreements, things like that across state lines. If it gets to the point where you have to represent a client in front of a tribunal, we won't do it. We won't draft trusts for people in other states that we're not licensed. And that's going to be state specific probably. And we try to just stay within those boundaries. And if we ever get to the point where something becomes complex enough where we need local counsel, we'll partner up with counsel in that state. And unfortunately, I have a pretty good network from LinkedIn where I know a lot of those people personally, or if not, it's an opportunity for me to get to know them and then have a referral partner from there. And for the filings, we used to do everything ourselves. We used to get an account with every state. We just use CorpNet now because it's so much easier. It takes a lot of administrative burden off. There's a fee to it, but we build that into our pricing so that we still get the margin we're looking for. And it's just kind of administrative garbage work that we don't want to have our lawyers spending time on.
Speaking of technology taking away garbage, low-level admin type work, AI, are you thinking about it? How are you thinking about it? How are you using it? That's the topic du jour. But it does a lot of these things like, yeah, this task maybe used to take 3 hours. Now, if I have an AI assistant, it can help me get the task done in, 30 minutes. So what are you looking at in that space?
We've got room to grow there. I don't feel like I've fully vetted the security and, kind of privileged client information aspect of that. But I would say most of our team uses AI regularly for certain purposes. And a lot of it's just kind of internal research. Let me check my own position against what might be out there. We've used a tool specific to tax called BlueJ that basically, will help my staff get from a general question down to the actual case law and the actual code and regs that govern something, so that if they are trying to respond to a client, they can easily reference those things without having to do a comprehensive search. I haven't used it to draft contracts. I have used it to draft policies that are kind of internal, and even I haven't done this yet, but I think we could draft an employee handbook. We use SHRM right now to get our handbooks, but I think you could do that. I think it would perform well if you asked it to do it. I think the most extensive project we've done with AI is a tool called Aragon.ai, and they do AI headshots, and they're unbelievable. I got like 100 proofs out of my photos, and if I didn't know that I didn't own those outfits or hadn't been to those places, I would have thought those are photographs of myself.
Is your LinkedIn photo from Aragon?
Absolutely, it is. Yes.
Okay.
We're up in the process of updating our website. By the time this is posted, our website will be updated, not just the content, but the photos. They'll be all uniform. We have a marketing intern who's working on that project right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, you're probably watching it close to publication date. But if you're listening to this on the podcast feed, then yes, then go check that out and you'll see that for sure. That's great. I mean, I could talk AI all day, and I would tell you, it's a great solution to figuring out if the AI tools help protect all that stuff is you take their terms of service and privacy policy and you put it into like your preferred AI tool of choice and you query it, right? And I actually use Notebook LM Plus because I'm a Google Workspace. Are you Microsoft or Google Workspace?
Microsoft. Yeah, I
Okay,
started with Google, and then I found that I was old school. I liked Outlook on the desktop version, and so I like my third year in, I spent an entire Thanksgiving weekend moving off of G Suite onto Office 365.
All right. Well. All I would suggest is that you consider the marginal cost of $12 a month to not use any of the other Google Workspace features just for Notebook LM Plus, because one of the things that it does is, first of all, it tells you right when you sign in for the first time, hey, privacy matters. This is an enterprise account. We're not training our AI and your data, everything's secure, it's all yours, right? It's like they give you that notification in addition to in their terms and in their docs, they say like, yeah, this is secure. You're paying user, so it's all yours. is you could upload into Notebook LM, into one of their notebooks, all the terms and service and privacy policies for a particular tool or what have you. And using natural language and semantic search, you could query against all those documents. And I do it. I'm also using Paxton as my legal AI tool that I use for stuff like that too, from a legal, if I need it to be legal specific. And Notebook LM Plus is comparable in terms of accuracy and usefulness as to that. And so I think it's worthwhile if you're going to be experimenting and exploring with this. And I'm telling you here, because the listeners could benefit from hearing this too, that you could use. And what I like about Notebook LM is it gives you a citations, just sort of like Perplexity does with its online search. But with Notebook, it's just the sources you've added to the notebook. And so you click on that citation, it opens it up, so you still see the summary and you see where in the document it's drawing that information from. So you could compare, oh yeah, like look, it says explicitly right there that, yeah, like we don't train on your data, right? Or your data is secure, it's confidential in their terms, right? So highly, highly recommend that you leverage that tool to do that. And even the free version might still be really good at that if you just have like a Gmail account. The amount of sources that you have, it's instead of 500, you only get 50. But it's terms of service, it's privacy policies. Like you don't need necessarily the paid enterprise level security. So just use the free Notebook LM version to do that.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to give that a shot for sure.
Yeah.
You just gave me a new shiny object to chase after. So there goes my billable time for the rest of the day.
Well, I'll tell you, Mike, it's worth it. And everyone I've told about Notebook LM, including clients who are like Microsoft Copilot subscribers, they are now also using Notebook LM in addition to Copilot and other things. It's just a powerful tool. So speaking of billable time, though, so it sounds to me like even though you're efficient, you're fixed fee, your subscription on most things, are you still doing time tracking? And if yes, why?
So not for the non-legal work, only for the legal work, because we've queried the state board, and they have told us that for legal work, we still need to justify more time. And, that it's obviously archaic. The presumption there is that the value provided to the client is for the time spent, which, in reality, the time spent on a project has nothing to do with the value provided to the client. It's the quality of work they get. And, value pricing is really how that should be determined. I've sat in the CLE with some of the board members on the board, the State Bar of Arizona, and they take a very firm position and still that our value comes down to number of hours spent and experience. And so really we're capped by, the billable hour. And then we also can't say, well, if that's the case, I'm very efficient, so I'm going to bill $1,600 an hour. Can't do that either because that's unreasonable according to them. And so we still have to track time for the legal work. Played with potentially moving back to tracking time for the accounting work, not for billing, but for internal metrics to, just to make sure that the predictions, our budget on certain projects is matching, our actual time, or if it's being exceeded, we will make adjustments, provide additional training, maybe make personnel decisions based off of those things.
Yeah. Oh, that is brutal. I will say, though, just coming off of ABA Tech Show last week, that there are a lot of really interesting AI tools built for lawyers to make sure it's secure and all that do passive time tracking, right? Where it's just like, it's just going to track your time and upload it. And if you're not billing that time, you don't have to have it like coded and worded in a certain way, but it will track all of your time. And it's leveraging AI to just like sit on your computer and in your apps and just like monitoring and just giving you a report. So have you looked into any of that passive time tracking tech?
No, that's the first time I've heard of that. I know there's tech that will, and this has been around before AI really, has become so prevalent, but there's kind of, they'll track your keystrokes and the amount of time spent per program. But if it breaks it down to which client you're working on, things like that, that's incredible. I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah, I wish off the top of my tongue I could say, oh, here's the tech tool. Like they're out there. There were a couple at Startup Alley that maybe did this, but then there are some other tools out there where that's their primary offering, or it's just like one of their features, right? Of doing that as the passive time tracking.
I love it. Yeah, I'm gonna look into that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm gonna, as soon as we're done, I'm running a Perplexity search to see if I can't Perplexity Pro search, see if I can't just find the tools for you and share the link with you. So rounding out the conversation here. I've talked to a lot of lawyers who have ditched the billable hour and think in terms of value rather than time and all that, right? Well, I'm always looking for a through line. And I have some ideas, I have a thesis, if you will, on like some of these through lines. I'm just curious to know, without even like sharing what I think first. What do you think it is about you that makes you different or unique or special that you're able to challenge the status quo and ditch the billable hour?
I think it's my risk tolerance, which has flipped completely since I started a business. I've always been very conservative. I mean, I got an accounting degree and then a law degree, just so I'd always have job security, right? I knew I wanted to start a business someday, but since from the first month of starting my business, I stopped thinking in terms of years and started thinking in terms of, do I have enough work for the next 2 weeks? Then I'm fine. I don't care. And so the risk tolerance comes into play because I'm betting against myself that I can, work more efficiently and, use tools and processes to get that project done in a timely manner that will, continue to, allow me to be profitable on it, without having to justify my time. And so that's really where it comes down for me is I'm betting against myself. And sometimes that bites us, right? Sometimes a project turns into a lot more than we bargained for. And, I remember one business deal we did, M&A transaction that was pretty significant. It was 8 figures. And, we charged way too low. It was a prominent publicly traded company that was on the other side buying our client's company. And our fees probably should have been 4 times higher than they were. And that was a lesson learned. We had a significant adjustment to our fees after that. We also built in some provisions into our operating agreement to say, hey, under certain circumstances, I know we've given you a flat fee for this deal, but under certain circumstances, whether it's time or, other elements, where our fees may adjust. And, we'll talk to you before that happens, but we need you to know there's certain circumstances, if it's out of scope work that comes up, et cetera, we will have to adjust fees. And there was one time where we did a separate deal from that one. And, I basically talked to the client after the deal was done. And I said, hey, just so you know, I'm not gonna charge you for this, but this is when I went into this deal. This is abnormal. These different factors that came up, kind of skeletons that were in the closet that we weren't expecting. I I'm not going to charge you because I didn't bring this up at the time. We just got the work done. And he actually said, you know what, that's fair. I'm going to pay you out another, X amount of dollars. And so he came back and generously, and he had just sold his business for multiple billions, but he came out and kind of made us whole on that one. So that was a nice gift, but we don't, typically I'm going to I'm going to bet on us that we can do it efficiently. And, instead of having to justify our time and have those arguments with the client, I never want to have those conversations again.
Right, but being able to effectively communicate the value you provided, I think, does make a difference, and it speaks volumes to the client still wanting to appropriately compensate you, and it makes me think of like Jeff Carr, and I can't remember what his model is, but you know how there was like you could always pay us more or you could pay us less, like that was like built into like his model, right? Yeah, I can't remember what he calls it, but yeah, success fees too are a way to sweeten those deals and make it make sense, right? We have a success fee that's X% of the total transaction that it closes for, right? And I've even seen deals where that success fee goes down over time because usually inherently there's more value in closing faster or resolving a dispute faster, that the lawyer gets rewarded financially for settling or closing faster rather than
Yeah.
it taking longer. So I think there's ways to, and, it requires a different algorithm, a different formula in your Excel spreadsheet to figure out what that is. But I think leveraging the success fee, the diminishing success fee, I think could be like a good way to cover that gap in the future.
Yeah, I'd love that. That's not something we currently do, but I've got a couple of deals I'm working on right now that I think that would make a lot of sense, and that the clients are motivated to get these things done faster. And so we're actually about to do pricing on both of these within the next couple of weeks. So that's something I'll start looking into. I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I'll put you into entrepreneur brain for the way the category, right? There's just neurodivergence in general. There's entrepreneur brain, which is definitely a different kind of neurodivergence. First generation lawyers tend to do this. Are you a first gen lawyer? I don't know if you have lawyers in the family or not.
So my dad's a farmer, but I do have a brother who's a lawyer. Got some in-laws that are lawyers and an uncle. But I was nothing I was exposed to growing up at all.
Right. So you didn't have come in with the dogma of we must bill hours because like I saw my parents or my uncle billing time all the time, right?
I think I actually think now thinking about it, I've never put this together, but my dad is a consultant for other farms, and he always bills flat fees based on projects. And so that's how I watched him. And I was, I did some bookkeeping for his business and things like that. That's how I watched him do it. And maybe that's what kind of took me down this road.
Yeah, look, my first job as an attorney, we were doing foreclosure defense, keeping a roof over people's heads, and they just paid us a fixed rate every month that we could keep them in their home. That probably put in the back of my, head like, hey, look at this. This is a business model here. I just
And
didn't,
the annuity, that's great.
right. I just wasn't thinking about it at the time, right? Like business model. I was a first year associate. Well, with that, I have one fun question to end that I like to end with all the guests when I remember to, Mike, and that is a hot dog a sandwich and why?
Absolutely not. I have no reason for that,
Come on,
but
back it up. Back it up. You said absolutely not. Why? Why do you think? Make up a reason.
it's in a different category. A sandwich is not cooked on a barbecue. That's what I'll say.
Okay, okay. I don't think I've heard that in over 100 times I've asked that question.
It's a method of creation, and the method of preparation rather.
Okay, so as long as my panini, I don't make the panini on the grill. If I do, then that panini's not a sandwich anymore.
That's right. A panini grill is different than a barbecue grill. So
Okay. But if you don't have a panini grill and you have to throw it on the barbecue, you just made that panini not a sandwich anymore. I'm just trying to follow the logic, Mike.
it follows. Absolutely, that follows.
All right. Well,
I'll buy that.
all right, if folks wanted to reach out, get in touch, I'm sure connect on LinkedIn. Like, where's all the place they could find and follow?
So LinkedIn, my name is Michael Payne, JD CPA. The website that you said before is bossadv.com. Those are the tools I use the most. Happy to talk through pricing or kind of how we've gotten to where we are. If anybody wants to talk about the alternative business structures, I just met with a gentleman on Saturday who flew in from out of town to meet and talk about starting an ABS in Arizona. And so I was able to provide some insight to him as how he might go about doing that. So lots of opportunity here in the Wild West. And, we'll see where it goes. It's been fun so far.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for being generous with your time and sharing your experience and what you've done with subscriptions in ABS with my audience. Stick around for a few seconds because we're going to stop going live here and we want to make sure LinkedIn captures all of it. So for those of you who joined us live, thank you very much. If you're watching this later on LinkedIn, put in the comments any questions that you have. Mike and I will be notified and we'll be sure to respond to those comments. Otherwise, get in touch with Mike. Like he said, connect and follow me on LinkedIn. DMs are always open.
Thanks, Matthew.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.